stability the top priority and
初
pursue
步核
progress
算，
while
一季
ensuring
度国内
stability.
生产总值
As a result, the national
27
economic
万亿
recovery
元，
was sustained and the
按
operation
不
of
变
the
价格
economy
计
was
算，
generally
同
stable.
比增长
According to
4.8%，
preliminary
比
estimates, the
2021
gross
年四季
domestic
度
product in the
环
first
比
quarter
增
reached
长 1.3%。 分产业看，
27.8
第一
billion
产业
yuan,
增加值
up by
1.1 万亿元，
4.8%
同比
year-on-year
增长
at constant
6%。
price, or up by
第二产业
1.3%
增加
over that in
值
the fourth quarter of
10.6 万
2021.
亿元，增长
By industry,
5.8%。
the value added of the primary industry
第三
was
产业增加值 15.3 万亿元，
1.09
增长 4%。
trillion yuan, up by 6% year-on-year. That of
农
the
业生
secondary
产形
industry
势稳
was
定，畜牧业
10.61
平稳增
trillion
长。
yuan, up by
一季度农业增加
5.8%,
值
and that
同
of the
比增
tertiary
长
industry was
4.8%。
15.3
气象条
trillion
件总
yuan,
体良
up
好
by 4%.
农业生产服务持续
Firstly,
加强，
agricultural
春耕
production
备
is
耕
stable and
平
animal
稳有
husbandry
序
grew
推进。
steadily. In
据
Q1,
全
the
年
value
种
added of
植
agriculture
种植意
grew
向调查显
year-on-year
示，
by
全国
4.8%,
小
with
麦、
generally favorable
稻
weather
谷
conditions
意
and
向
strong
种植面
agricultural
积、
production
播
services.
种面积
Spring
总体
farming
稳
and
定。
preparation were carried out in a
大豆
steady
播
and
种
orderly manner. According
面
to the
积
year-round
意向种
planting
植
intention
意向播种
survey,
面积
the
增
planting
加
area
较多。
intended for wheat
一
and
季度
rice was
猪
generally
牛羊
stable,
禽肉
and
产
that for
量
soybeans increased
2395
considerably.
万吨，
In the first
同
quarter,
比
the
增
output
长
of meat and poultry
8.8%，
was
其中猪肉、
23.95 million
牛
tons,
肉、
up by
羊肉产量
8.8%
分别
year-on-year.
增长
Of this
14%、
total, the output of pork,
3.6%、
beef, and mutton was
1.4%。
up by 14%,
牛奶产量增长
3.6%, and
8.3%，
1.4% respectively.
禽蛋
The
产量
output of
增长
milk was up by
2.5%。一季度
8.3%,
末
and that of eggs
生猪
up by
存栏
2.5%.
4.2
At the
亿
end
头，
of Q1, the number of
同
pigs
比
in
增长
stock was
1.6%。
422
其中能
million,
繁母猪存栏
up by
4185
1.6%
万
year-on-year,
头。
among which
工
41.85
业生产
million
较
were
快增
breeding
长，
sows.
中高端制造业
Secondly,
发展较好。
industrial production grew
一
fast,
季
and
度全国
middle
规模以上工业
to
增加
high-end
值同比
manufacturing
增长
industries
6.5%。
enjoyed sound growth.
分
The
三大
total
门
value
类
added
看，
of
采
large-scale
矿业增
industrial
加值
enterprises
同
grew
比
by
增长 10.7%，
6.5% year-on-year in the
制
first
造业
quarter.
增长
By sectors,
6.2%，
the value added of mining
电
increased
力、
by
热力、燃气
10.7%,
及水生产和
manufacturing
供应
up
业
by
增长
6.2%, production
6.1%，
and supply of electricity,
高基础
thermal
制造
power,
业、
gas, and
装
water
备制造业
up by
增加值分别
6.1%.
增长
The value added of
14.2%
high-tech
和
manufacturing and
8.1%，
equipment manufacturing
增
increased
速
by
分别比规模以上
14.2%
工
and
业快
8.1%
7.7% 和
respectively.
1.6个百分点。
That's 7.7 percentage
分经济
points
类
and
型看，
1.6
国有
percentage
控
points
股企业
faster
增加
than
值
that of the
同比
large-scale
增长
industrial
5%，
enterprises.
股
By
份制
types
企业增
of
长
ownership, the value
7.8%，
added of state-holding
外商
enterprises
及
was
港
up by
台商投资企业
5%
增长
year-on-year, that of
2.1%，
joint stock
私营
enterprises
企业
up by
增长 7.6%。
7.8%, and that of
分
enterprises
产品
funded by
看，
foreign investors
新能
or
源汽
investors
车、
from Hong Kong,
太阳
Macau,
能
and
电
Taiwan
池、
was up by
工业机型产
2.1%,
量分
that
别
of
增
private
长
enterprises was up by
144.8%、
7.6%. In terms of products, the
24.3%、
production of new energy vehicles,
10.2%。
solar cells, and industrial
3月
robots
份
were
规
up
模以
by
上工业增加值同比增长
140.8%,
5%， 环
24.3%
比增
and
长
10.2%
0.39%。
respectively.
3 月
In
份
March,
制
the
造业
value
采
added of
购经理指
large-scale
数
industrial
为
enterprises grew by 5%
49.5%，
year-on-year, or
企业生产经营活动
0.39%
预期指数
month-on-month.
为
In March, the
55.7%。
manufacturing purchasing managers index
1至
stood
2 月
at
份全国规模以上工业企业实
45.5%,
现利润总
and the
额
production and operation
1.2 万亿
expectation
元，
index was
同比增长 5%。
55.7%. In the first 2
3
months, the total
服
profits
务
made
业
by
持续
industrial
增长，
enterprises
现代
were
服务业增势较好。
1.15 trillion yuan,
一季
up
度
by
服务业
5%
继续恢
year-on-year.
复，其中信息
Thirdly,
传输、
service sector
软
continued
件
to
和
grow,
信
and
息技
modern
术服务
services
业、
registered a good
金
momentum
融业
of
增加
growth.
值同
In
比分
Q1,
别
the
增长
service sector continued to
10.8%
recover,
和
specifically the value
5.5%。
added of information
一
transmission
季度
software and
全国
information
服务业生
technology
产指
services
数同
and
比增长
financial
2.5%，
intermediation
其中
grew by
3月份同比下
10.8%
降
and
0.9%。
5.1%
1至
year-on-year.
2月份
The
规模以
index
上
of
服务
services
业企业
production
营业
increased
收
by
入同比增
2.5%
长
in the first quarter and
13.6%。
decreased by
3月份
0.9%
服务业商务
year-on-year
活
in
动指
March.
数为
In the first 2 months,
46.7%，
the business revenue
业务
of
活动预
services
期指数为
enterprises grew by
53.6%。
13.6%
其
year-on-year.
中铁
In
路运
March,
输、
the business
航空
activity
运输、
index for
住
services
宿、
stood
餐
at
饮等接触性、聚集
46.7%,
性行
and
业
the business
受
activity
疫情影响
expectation
较大。
index was
电信、
53.6%.
广播电视
Industries
及
involving
卫星
contacts
传
and
输服
gatherings
务、
such as railway
货币金
transportation,
融服务、
airway,
保
lodging
险
and
业
catering
等
were
行业商务
greatly
活动指数
were under
位于
impact by the pandemic.
55%以上，
The
较
business
高景
activity Activity Index for industries like telecommunication,
市
broadcast
场销
television
售
and
保持
satellite
增长，
transmission services,
网上零售
monitoring
较
financial
为活跃。
services, and insurance
一季度
services stayed within
社
the
会消
high
费品零
expansion
售总
range
额
of
10.9万亿
55%
元，
and above.
同比增长
Fourthly, market sales
3.3%。
maintained growth and
按
online
基因
retail
单位
sales
所
were
在地
active.
分，
In the first quarter,
城
the
镇
total
消费品
retail
零
sales
售
of
额
consumer goods reached
9.4万亿
10.86
元，
trillion yuan,
增
up by
长
3.3%
3.2%。
year-on-year. By different areas, the retail sales of consumer goods in urban areas reached 9.4 trillion yuan, up by 3.2%, and that in rural areas, 1.43 trillion yuan, up by 3.5%. By consumption patterns, the retail sales of goods were 9.8 trillion yuan, up by 3.6%, and the income of catering was 1.06 trillion yuan, up by 0.5%. Goods for basic living enjoyed good sales, with retail sales of grain, oil, and food, and daily necessities by large enterprises up by 9.3% and 6.6% respectively. The sales of upgraded consumer goods grew fast. The retail sales of cultural and office appliances and jewelries by large enterprises grew by 10.6% and 7.6% respectively. The online retail sales reached 3.012 trillion yuan, up by 6.6%. Specifically, the online retail sales of physical goods were 2.525 trillion yuan, up by 8.8%, and accounting for 23.2% of the total retail sales of consumer goods. In March, the total retail sales of consumer goods reached 3.42 trillion yuan, down by 3.5%, and 1.93% month-on-month. Fifthly, investment in fixed assets increased and investment in high-tech industries and social sectors grew fast. In Q1, the investment in fixed assets, excluding rural households, reached 10.48 trillion yuan, up by 9.3% over that of previous year. Specifically, investment in infrastructure was up by 8.5%, manufacturing up by 15.6%, real estate development up by 0.7%, and the floor space of commercial buildings sold reached 310.46 million square meters, down by 13.8%. The total sales of commercial buildings were 2.96 trillion yuan, down by 22.7%. By industry, the investment in the primary sector went up by 6.8%, secondary industry up by 16.1%, and in the tertiary industry up by 6.4%. The private investment reached 5.96 trillion yuan, up by 8.4%. The investment in high-tech industries grew by 27%. Specifically, the investment in high-tech manufacturing and high-tech services grew by 32.7% and 14.5% respectively. In terms of high-tech manufacturing, the investment in manufacturing of electronic and communications equipment and of medical equipment, measuring instrument and meter grew by 37.5% and 35.4% respectively. In terms of high-tech services, the investment in information services and services for transformation of scientific and technological achievements or commercialization went up by 21.3% and 19% respectively. The investment in social sectors went up by 16.2%. Specifically, the investment in health sector and education sector went up by 23.8% and 17.2%. In March, the investment in fixed assets went up by 0.61% month-on-month. Sixthly, imports and exports of goods witnessed rapid growth and trade structure continued to improve. In Q1, the total value of imports and exports of goods was 9.41 trillion yuan, an increase of 10.7% over that of the previous year. The total value of export was 5.22 trillion yuan, up by 13.4%. Of imports was 4.18 trillion yuan, up by 7.5%. The trade balance was 1.03 trillion yuan in surplus. The general trade increased by 13.9%, accounting for 63.2% of the total value of trade, 1.8 percentage points higher than that of the same period of the previous year. The trade by private enterprises accounted for 48% of total value of trade, 1.4 percentage points higher than last year. In March, the total value of trade was 3.206 trillion yuan, up by 5.8% year-on-year. The total value of exports was 1.75 trillion yuan, up by 12.9%. That of imports was 1.45 trillion yuan, down by 1.7%. Seventhly, consumer price experienced mild growth, and the year-on-year growth of producer prices for industrial products slowed. In Q1, the CPI grew by 1.1% over last year. Specifically, CPI in urban areas went up by 1.2%, and in rural areas went up by 0.7%. By commodity categories, prices for food, tobacco, and alcohol went down by 1.3%, 3%, clothing up by 0.5%, residence up by 1.4%, articles and services for daily use up by 0.6%, transportation communication up by 5.5%, education, culture and recreation up by 2.6%, medical services and healthcare up by 0.6%, and other up by 0.7%. In terms of food, tobacco and alcohol prices, the price for grain went up by 1.7%, fresh fruit up by 6.9%, fresh vegetables up by 3.7%, and pork down by 41.8%. The core CPI, excluding the price of food and energy, grew by 1.2% over the last year. In March, the CPI went up by 1.5% year-on-year and 0.6 percentage points faster than that of February, and maintained the same level month-on-month. In Q1, the producer prices for industrial products went up by 8.7% year-on-year. Specifically, the prices in March went up by 8.3%, 0.5 percentage points slower than the growth in February, or up by 1.1% month-on-month. In Q1, the purchasing prices for industrial producers went up by 11.3%. Specifically, March prices went up by 10.7% year-on-year, 0.5 percentage points slower compared with the growth in February, or up by 1.3% month-on-month. Eighthly, newly increased employment in urban areas expanded, and surveyed unemployment rate increased. In the first quarter, the newly increased employed people in urban areas numbered 2.85 million, and the urban surveyed unemployment rate averaged 5.5%. In March, the urban surveyed unemployment rate was 5.8%, which is 0.3 percentage points higher compared with February. The surveyed unemployment rate of population with local household registration was 5.6%, but the population with non-local registration was 6.3%. Among which the rate of population with non-local agricultural household registration was 5.9%. Specifically, the surveyed unemployment rates of the population aged from 16 to 24 and from 25 to 59 was 16% and 5.2% respectively. The urban surveyed unemployment rate in 31 major cities was 6%. Employees of enterprises worked 47.3 hours per week on average. At the end of the first quarter, the number of migrant workers who left their hometowns and worked in other places totaled 177.8 million. Ninthly, residents' income increased stably, and urban-rural per capita income ratio narrowed. In Q1, the nationwide per capita disposable income of residents was 10,345 yuan, with nominal growth of 6.3% year-on-year, or the real growth of 5.1% after deducting price factors. In terms of permanent residents, the per capita disposable income was in cities was 13,832 yuan, with nominal growth of 5.4% year-on-year and real growth of 4.2%. Per capita disposable income of rural households was 5,778 yuan, with a nominal growth of 7% and real growth of 6.3%. In terms of income source, the nationwide per capita salary income, net operative income, net property income, and net income from transfers saw a growth of 6.6%, 5.4%, 6.1%, and 6.3% in nominal terms, respectively. Per capita disposable income of urban households was 2.39 times that of rural households, 0.04 less than the ratio of the same period last year. The median of the nationwide per capita disposable income of residents was 8,504 yuan, with nominal growth of 6.1% year-on-year. Generally speaking, the economy in Q1 continued the momentum of recovery, performing within the reasonable range. We must be aware that domestic and international environment becoming more complicated and uncertain. As we face these challenges, we must follow the guidance of Xi Jinping's autumn socialism and trans characteristics for a new era, and fully implement the spirits of the Central Economic Work Conference and the arrangements made by the report of work of the government. We must coordinate the efforts of COVID-19 response and social development, make economic stability our top priority and pursue progress while ensuring stability, and put the task of 6 assurances and safeguards front and center. We will continue to stabilize prices, improve people's lives, and keep the economy performance within an appropriate range. Now, the floor is open for questions. Please identify your affiliation before raising your question.
好，先这边吧，第二排这位男记者。对。
好，谢谢主持人。总台央广记者提问：我们知道刚才发布的一季度的主要指标当中，工业生产是保持了一个较快的增长，那请问原因是什么？后期的走势会怎么样？
What do you look at the economic performance in the first quarter, and what is the future trend of China's economy?
今年以来呢，在促进工业
Thank you for your question. Since this year,
那么工业生产呢总体稳定。
industrial production is generally stable as we are taking more policies to stabilize the production. In the first quarter, the added value of major industries increased by 6.5% year on year, better than the fourth quarter and maintaining a steady growth.
带动和世界经济复苏拉动的
The
影响，
reasons can be credited
创新
to
驱动，
domestic and global economic recovery and be attributed to innovation-driven development,
那么还有市场
as
保
well
供
as
加强
the upgrade in
相
industrial
关行业
development.
较快增长的作用。
Also,
那么一
efforts
是
to
呢，产
ensure
业升级
supply
的带动作用明
and
显。
rapid growth of
随
relevant
着我国
industries
发展阶
are
段的
also
变
playing
化，市
important
场对
roles.
中高端
First,
产品需求增加，
industrial upgrade.
加之创新驱动战略有效实施，
Our development
产业升级步
phase
伐
continue
加
to be
快。
advanced. The markets,
装备
there
制
is
造
a
业
growing
发
market
展较
demand
好，
for medium to high-end
高技术
products.
制造业呢
This
增
is
长
this
较
is
快。
coupled with
那么对
the
工业支撑
implementation
的
of the
作用比较
innovation-driven
明显。
development.
一季度呢，
Equipment
装备
manufacturing
制
is
造业同
developing
比增长
sound.
8.1%， 其中
In the
电
first
气、机
quarter,
械和器材制造业、
Equipment manufacturing
计
increased
算
by
机、通信和
8.1%
其
year
他
on
电子
year.
设备制造业增长均
In
超过
particular, electric
10%。
mechanics and
那么二者拉动规模以上工业增长呢？
computers,
大概
telecommunications, and other
那么一季
electronic
度呢，高
products
技术制造业
all
同比
increased
增
by
长
over
了
10%.
14.2%，也明显快于
In the first
全国
quarter,
规模以上工业
high-tech
增长。
and manufacturing increased
二
by
是消费品
more
制造
than
业生产扩大，
14.2%
随着经
faster
济的
than
持续
other
恢复，
major industries.
居民
Second,
生活消费品市场
consumption
需求
products
扩大，带动相关
manufacturing
制造业
continues to
增
be
长。
expanded.
一季度消费品制造
There is a
业
growing
增加
demand
值同比
for
增长8.1%，
consumption goods.
其中农副食品加工业、
This also contributed
食品
to
制
the
造
growth
业、
in manufacturing
酒饮
growth.
料
In the
和
first quarter,
精致茶制制造
agricultural
业、医
sideline
药制造业
products,
增加值
processing,
分别增长
food
了
processing,
6.4%、
alcohol, and fine tea
6%、
processing industries, as well
12.1%
as
和
pharmaceuticals,
11.8%。
increased by
这四个行业拉
6.4%,
动规模以
6%,
上工业
12.1%,
增长
and
约
11.8%
1%左右。
respectively. In total, these four
三
industries
是工业
contributed
出口
to
增
1
长较快，
percentage points
我国产业
to
体系
the
齐
growth
全，
of major
配套
industries.
能力强，
Third,
能
export
够
growth
较快地适
is
应
expanding more
国际
rapidly.
市场需求的变化。
We have
那
a
么国
fully
外对我
fledged
国工业品出口的需求扩
industrial
大，
system with
也拉动
strong
了工业
supporting
生产增长。
capacities. We are
一季度
adaptive to
工业出
global
口交货
changes.
值同比
In the
增
first
长了
quarter,
14.4%，
shipment value of industrial
继续
export
保持较快
increased by
增长。其中汽
14.4%,
车制造业、
a relatively
专用设
fast
备制造
pace.
业一季度
In
的出口
particular,
交货值
car
均超
manufacturing
过了
and
增长均超过
designated
20%。
products manufacturing shipment value
四是煤炭
increased
电力的
by
行业的
over
生产扩大，
20%.
能源原材料市场保供持续加
Production
力，
expanded in
相关行业
coal
生产
and
较快增长。
electricity industries.
一季度采矿业同
We are
比增长了
making more efforts
增加值
to
同比
ensure
增长
supply.
10.7%，
In the first quarter,
其中煤炭开
the
采和
mining
稀选业增加
industry
值
increased
增
by
长了
10.7%
13.2%。
year on year.
同时，
Mining
一季度
and
电力、
washing of
热力生
coal
产和供应业、
increased by
燃气生产
13.2%.
和供应业也保持
Production
增
and
长。
supply
那么初步
industries
测
of
算呢，
electricity and
采
heating
矿业、
and that
电力、热
of
力和燃
gas
气行业
are
增
also
长合
expanding
计拉动
rapidly.
规模以上工业呢
In total,
增长大约
these
在
industries
1.4%。
contributed to around
同
1.4
时呢，一系
percentage
列支
points
持企
to
业纾困
the
发展的
growth
政
of
策
major
措施，
industries.
对于稳定工业
Relief
生产也
policies
发
for
挥了积极的作
businesses
用。
are also playing a
那
positive
么一季
role
度呢，
to
根据对
steady
全
to
国近
stabilize
11
industrial
万家规模
production.
以上
In the
工业
first
企业的
quarter,
问卷调查
we
显
have
示，
surveyed
那么企
around
业对各项优惠政策的满意度
110,000
呢，
businesses
环
in
比提高了
major
2.7个
industries.
百分点。其中，企业对减税降费政策的满意度超过了 85%。
4% of those companies are
但也要看
satisfied
到
with
呢，
our relief
受疫情冲击影
policies,
响加大，
2.7 percentage points higher
生产的
on a
增长
quarterly
有所放
basis,
缓。
and their
企业
satisfaction
生
rates
产经
for
营困
tax
难
and
有
fee
所增
cuts
加。
were over 85%.
面
At
对
the
新
same
情
time,
况
due to COVID,
新变化，既要正视困难，
in March,
采取措施积
industrial
极应
growth
对，
have
更
slowed
要坚定信心，
for major
看到工业
industries.
生产总
We
体稳
need
定，发展韧性
to
强
see，that
完
we
全
are
有
still
条件
resilient.
顶住压力，
We are
保持平稳运
fully
行。
prepared to
下阶
withstand
段
the
要落
pressure
实好
and
各
ensure the
项推
steady
动工业
growth
经济发展
of
的
industrial
支持
production.
政
Going
策，
forward,
积极
we
扶
need
持
to
制造业、
deliver
小
on
微
the
企业，
supportive policies
加大对受疫情影
of
响严重企
major
业的支持，
industries,
加
and
强
extend
能
support
源
for
原材料保
manufacturings
供
and
稳价，
MSMEs.
维护产业链
We'll
供应
also
链稳
support
定，
companies
促进工
that are
业
affected
平稳
by
健康发展。
COVID and
谢谢。
ensure supply and
好，
the
继续
price
提问。
and a stable price price for energy raw materials. Thank you.
好，先这边吧，就是这一排第几排？ 往前走，对，第4排这位女记者。
您好，中国日报记者提问。
Thank you from
近
China
期
Daily.
受到国外的这个复杂的国际环
Due
境
to complex
以及
international
近期
circumstances
国内多地的散发疫情的影
and
响，
domestic
中国
flare-up
经
of
济也面临
cases,
较大的压力。
China's
想问
economy
一
is
下您
facing
对此怎么
pressure.
看
What is
此
your
外我想
assessment?
问一下，一季度的经济运行有何特点？
What are the
对此有何
characteristics of
评
the
价？
first
谢谢。
quarter economic operation?
谢
Thank you.
谢您的提问。大家呢对中国经济的
Thank you for your
关注度
question.
比较高，特别是对于一季度经济的
Chinese
形势变化
economy,
情况比
especially
较关注。
the Q1
那么应
statistics,
该说呢，
is
今年以
followed
来呢，
very
国际
widely
形势
by the
呢
media.
应该是更趋复杂严
This
峻。
year, we can see
国
that the
内的
international
疫
situation
情
is
呢也
getting more
呈现
complex
点
and
多、
challenging.
面广、频发的特
And
点。
at
那
home,
么对经济运行的冲击
COVID-19
影响加大。
is
那么面对复杂的局
reappearing
面
in
呢，
many
那
places,
么各地区各部门呢，
and
深入
cases are
贯彻落
detected more
实党中
frequently.
央国务院的
This
决
has
策
dealt
部署
a，heavy impact on
坚持稳字
economic
当头、稳
performance.
中求进，着力
Facing
稳
complex
定关键大
challenges,
盘，
regions and
有效应
departments
对
have
风险
implemented
风险挑
decisions
战。
of CPC Central
国
Committee
民
and
经
State
济呢，总
Council.
体看是继续恢复
Port，stability has
开
our
局
top
总体平
priority
稳。
and pursued
那么
progress
主要
while
表现在以
ensuring
下几个方
stability.
面。
We focused on
一
stabilizing
是
the
主要宏观指标
macroeconomic
呢，保持
fundamentals
在合
and
理曲线。
effectively met risks and
从增长
challenges.
看呢，
That's why the
经
economy
济继续
continued to
保持
recover,
扩张态
and
势。一
Q1
季
was
度国
off
内
to
生
a
产
good
总值
start.
同比增长
Basically,
4.8%，
first, the major
增速呢高于上
macroeconomic
年四季度
indicators were
0.8
kept in
个
the
百分点，
appropriate range.
环比
In
呢
terms
增
of
长了
growth,
1.3%。
GDP in
从就业
Q1
看，
grew by
尽管受疫情冲击
4.8%.
影响，3月份
That's
全国城镇
0.8
调查
percentage
失业
points
率
higher than
有
Q4
所上
last
升，
year and
但是从总的
1.3%
看，
higher than
就业
Q4
总体稳定的格局
quarter
没有改
on
变。
quarter.
一季度
In terms of
全国
employment,
城镇调查失业率
the overall
平均为
stability in
5.5%，
China's employment has
比上
not
年同
changed
期
despite
基
the
本持平。
uptick in surveyed
从物
unemployment
价
rate
看，
in cities in
市
March.
场商品和
In
服务
quarter
供给
in
总体充
Q1,
足，居民消费
urban
价
surveyed
格温和上
unemployment
涨。
rate on average
一
was
季度居民消费价
5.5%,
格
basically the same
同
as
比
last
上
year.
涨
In terms
1.1%。
of prices, CPI in
从国际收
Q1
支看，
rose moderately
货物贸易
by
顺差扩大，
1.1%.
服务贸易逆差缩
In
小，
terms of international
外
balance
汇
of
储
payment,
备稳定在3.2万亿
the surplus in
美元
trading
以
goods
左右。
expanded while the
国际
deficit
收
in
支状
trading
况
services
保持稳
narrowed.
定。
Foreign exchange reserve
二是
stabilized
工
at
农业
around
生产总体稳定，
$3.2 trillion.
春耕备耕有序推
And
进，
international
畜
balance
牧业
of
生
payment
产平
is
稳增长，
stable.
农业
Secondly,
形势保持稳
industry and
定。
agriculture
一季
production
度
was
农林牧
generally
渔业增
stable.
加值同比增长
Farming,
6.1%。
spring farming and preparation is
猪
well
牛羊禽
underway.
肉产量
Animal
增
husbandry
长
production
8.8%，
grew
工
steadily,
业生产
and the
较快
agriculture
增长。
situation
一
has
季度规
sustained.
模以上工业增加值
In
同
the
比
first
增
quarter,
长 6.5%， 其中装备制造业
agriculture,
增加值
forestry,
同比
animal
增长
husbandry, and
8.1%。
fisheries increased by
三是创新发
6.1%,
展
while
态势持
poultry
续，
and meat grew
新
by
产业不断成长。
8.8%.
一季
Industrial
度
output grew
高技
fast.
术制造业增加值同比增长14.2%，
Thirdly,
信息
innovation-driven
传
growth
输、软
continued.
件和信息技术服务业增
New
加值
industries continue to
增
grow.
长
In Q1,
10.8%，
high-tech manufacturing grew by
均保持较快的增长。
14.2%. Information
那么新模
transmission
式、
software and
新业
IT
态呢持
services
续
grew
壮大。
by
一季度
10.8%,
呢，
all very
实物商
fast.
品网上零售
New
额
modes
同比
of
增长了
businesses continue to
8.8%，
strengthen.
在
In
去年高
Q1,
基数的基础上，
physical
继续保
product
持增长
sales online grew by
占社会消费品零售
8.8%,
总额的比重
accounting for
达到了
23.2% of total consumer goods retail
四
sales.
是经济结构调整优化，
Fourthly,
制造业
our
占比
economic
继续提
mix
升。
continued to
一
improve.
季度制造业增加值
Manufacturing
同比
continued
增
to
长了
take a bigger part.
6.1%，
In
占国内
Q1,
生产总值的比
manufacturing
重
grew
为
by 6.1%,
28.9%，
accounting for
比上年同期提高
28.9% of
1.3个百
total
分点。
GDP. That's
消费
1.3
主导作
percentage
用
points
明
higher
显。
than last year.
一季度最终消
The
费支
driving
出增
role
长
of
对经济增长的
consumption
贡
is
献率
very
为
significant. In
69.4%，
Q1, final consumption and expenditure
比
contributed
上年同期提高
69.4% to economic
18.7 个
growth,
百分点，
which is
高于资
18.7
本形成
percentage
总额
points
的贡
higher
献
than
率。
last year, and
城乡
higher
居民收入比
than
值下降，
the contribution
一
of
季度
capital formation.
城乡居民人均可支配收
The
入
ratio
比
of
值为
urban and rural
2.39，
income
比上年同期
have
缩
come
小
down
了
a bit. In
0.04。
Q1,
五是
disposable
绿色
income
转型
ratio
稳步
of
推进，
rural
绿
urban
色低碳
residents
产
was
品较快增长。
2.39. That's
一季度新能源汽
0.04,
车、
smaller
太
than
阳能
last year.
电池产量
Fifthly, economic transition continued to proceed steadily.
24.3%，
Green and low carbon
清
products
洁能
grew
源消
very
费占
fast.
比继续提升。
In
一季度
Q1, the production of
天然气、
new energy
水
vehicles
和
and solar
光
cells
电
grew by
清洁能源消费
140.8%
所
and
占比重
24.3%
比上年同
respectively,
期
and clean
提
energies
高
continued to
0.8个百分点。
rise in its share in energy
单位 GDP
consumption.
能耗继续
In
下降
Q1, natural gas, hydropower, nuclear power, and other clean energies take a higher share in energy consumption that's 0.8 percentage points
居民
higher.
收入持续增长。
Unit
一季度全国居民人均可支配
consumption
收
per
入
unit of
扣
GDP
除价格因
continued
素
to decline.
同比
In
实际增长
Q1,
5.1%。
it dropped by
其
2.3%.
中农村居民人均可支配收入
Fifthly,
实际
people's
增
life
长
continued to improve.
6.3%。
Residents' income continued to grow in Q1. Nationwide, the disposable income grew by 5.1%. Rural residents grew by 6.3%, and for cities, the number grew by 4.2%. The basic needs of people have been met in Q1. The
限额以上单位粮油食品类、饮料
consumer
类商
goods
品零售额
manufacturing grew by
分别增长
8.1%,
9.3%和11.8%。
and retail sales of
民生领域
food,
投
oil, and
资继续增
grain
加，一季
and
度
beverages grew
教
by
育卫生领域投资
9.3%
分
and
别增长
11.8%
17.2%
respectively.
和
Investment in social
23.8%。
sectors increased continuously.
需要指
In
出的是
Q1,
，3月份以
investment
来
in
世界
education
局
and
势
health grew
复
by
杂演变，
17.2%
国内
and
疫情影响
23.8%
持
respectively.
续。
It is worth noting that since March, the world situation has been
部分主要指标增
complex
速放缓
and，fluid,
经
and
济下行压力有所加大。
domestically, the
但我国
COVID-19
经济长
continues
期
to
向好的基本
have an
面
impact on
没
the
有改变，
economy. Some of the
经济持
factors
续
have
恢复的
exceeded our
态势没有
expectation,
改变，
and that's why some
发展
major
潜大、
indicators
韧性
slowed,
足、
and
空
there's
间
a
广的特
pressure
点
on
也没有改
economic
变，
performance.
完
But
全有
the
能
sound
力、有
fundamentals
条
for the
件
China's
战胜
economy in
困
the
难挑
long
战，
run remains
实现
unchanged,
经济
and
持
a
续健
momentum
康发
of
展。
economic recovery and growth
下
remains
阶段要
unchanged.
全面贯彻
We
落
still
实
enjoy
中央经济工
huge
作会议
potential,
精神
strong resilience,
和
and
政
broad
府工作
space.
报告的部署，
We have the capacity and
科学
conditions to
统筹
overcome
疫
difficulties
情
and
防控
challenges
和
and
经济社会
achieve
发展，
sustained, healthy
坚
economic
持
growth.
稳字当头、稳中
Going
求进，
forward, we will continue
把
to
稳增长
implement
放在更加
the
突出的位置，
decisions of the Central Work
加大
Economic
宏观政
Conference and
策
the
实
Government
施
Work
力度，
Report,
狠抓
coordinate
政策落
COVID-19
实，
response in economic and
力
social
争
development,
早
continue
落
to
地、
pursue
早见效，
progress while ensuring
有效应
stability
对，
and
突出
place
矛盾，
stabilizing
稳
the
定经济
growth
基
at a
本
more
盘，
prominent
保障基
position.
本民
We
生，
will focus on
保持经济
stabilizing
运
the
行在合
economic
理期间，
fundamentals, meeting
推动
people's
经济
basic needs,
高质量发
keep
展，
the
不
key
断取得
economic
积极的成
indicators
效。
within
谢谢。
appropriate range, and continue to
继续
score
提问。
new achievements in high-quality economic development.
好，先这边吧 ，CNBC 第二排。
好，谢谢主持人，我是 CNBC 的记者。
Thank
我
you.
有两个问
With
题，第一个问题
CNBC.
是关于
I have
就
two
业，
questions. First,
就
on
是
employment.
今年一季度，我看那个
In
新
Q1,
增的
newly created
新增
jobs
就职位，就是比去年一季度有下降，就是有没有分析
Dropped
为什么这
from
个
Q1
数
last
字
year.
的一些减少？然后
What are the
还有
reasons
说
of this fall?
在就业方面有没有关于35
And
以上的
in
就业
terms
情
of
况？
employment
然后第二个问
figure
题是关于
data
生
for
产
people above
您刚才
35
也
years
是分
old.
享
Do you
到
have
一些
more
生产的一些
details?
情况啊，那受到
Another
最近
question
防疫的一些
regards
措施，有一些企业
work and
家他们
production
担心，
due
如
to
果到5月
COVID-19.
份
Some
没有
worry
办法复
that
工，会
if
不会
work and
对他
production
们
cannot
的
be
生产会
resumed
有一
till
定的
May,
影响？那您对这
their
个
operation
生产的
will
对经济的一些
be
影响
hit.
有什么
So what
观
is
点？
your
谢谢。
view on
谢谢
this
您的提问
impact on the
主要关
economic
心就
performance
业还有
in
这个
the coming
疫情对
period?
生产的一些影响。应该来说呢，今年以来呢，国际形势
Thank
呢
you for the
其实
question.
明确国内的疫情
We
影响
know
持续
that
对就
domestic
业呢
flare-ups
造
of
成一定的压力。
cases and the international
但是就业
landscape
优
have
先政策
indeed
应该
posed
说
pressure
持续发力，
on employment, but
助其纾
employment
困的
first
力度
policy is
加
brought
大，
to bear.
就业形势总的发
Relief
展
policies for
基本稳定。
businesses are
一
also
季度呢，
brought to
全国
bear.
城镇调查
In the
失业率
first
呢，
quarter
平
surveyed,
均为5.5%，
unemployment
比
was
上年同期呢
averaged
略高
5.5%,
0.1个百分点。
0.1
其中25
percentage
到
points higher
59岁
than
的就业主体人群的失
than
业
last
率
year.
为4.9%，与上年同期呢是持平的。
4.9% of them are above
那么从这个
35
数
years
据
old.
看呢，全国城镇调查失业率呢有所升高，其中1
There's
月
an
2月的
increase
升高
in
呢
the surveyed
主要是由于季
unemployment.
节性的因素。
The
那么因
reason for that in
因为
the
呢，在
first
春节
2
前后
months
呢，
is due to
求职
quarterly
人换工
reasons,
作呢，
seasonal reasons.
那么会
There are changes
这
of
个
employment
会带来这个失业率的有所上升
in。the Spring
那么
Festival
从一般的经
season
验来
will
看呢，3月份以后呢，
result
随着
in
这个
a higher
工作人员逐
unemployment
步找到工
rate.
作以后呢，这个城镇调查失业
Coming
率呢会逐步下
March,
降。
we will
但今年
see
3月份以
a
来呢，受国内
decrease.
疫情的
Normally,
影
we will
响
see a
呢，部
decrease
分
in
人群的
unemployment,
就业难度
but
增
due
加，
to
一
a
些
variety
求
of
职人呢参
reasons,
加招聘呢也受 受到一定的这个
people's employment is affected due to
3月份的全国城镇调查失业率呢
A number of
为
reasons.
5.8%，比上月
In
呢
March,
上升了0.3个百分点。
surveyed unemployment rate was 5.8% in
企业的这
March,
个生产经营困难
higher
有所
than
增加，就业压力呢有所加大。
February. It reflects a growing
但是呢
pressure
我国就业
on
保持稳定
employment.
呢仍然具备较多有利的条
Regardless,
件。
there are still favorable factors for us to maintain steady employment.
疫情的不利影
We
响
will strike a balance between economic
今年呢政
development
府进一
and
步加大
pandemic
减税降费，
response. We will
加大对
continue
实
to
体经
adopt
济的
tax
支持，
and fee
有
cuts
利
to
于企业
support
纾困发展，
businesses
稳定就业岗
and
位。
alleviate
同
their
时，
pressure.
创业
It
创新
will
的
be
态势呢
conducive
持续，
to
也
job
有利于
creation.
促进就业岗位的增加。加强职业技
Innovation
能
will
培训和
also
就业
be
帮扶，
conducive to
也有
the
利于就
increase
业
in
上
job
更直接的连
opportunities,
接。下阶段呢，要充
which
分利用
will
这些有
be
利条
good
件，
for
统
the
筹
supply
好
and
疫情
demand
防
in the
控
job
和经济社会
market.
发展，强化就业优先
We
政策，
will continue
推动
to
减负
advance
稳岗
the
或就
employment
业，
first
积极稳
policy,
定市场主体，
stabilize
保
the
证
job
就业，
market,
做好
and
大学生
ensure
和
that
农业、
people
农民工等重点
can
群
find
体就业
jobs.
帮扶，
We will
促进
work
就业形
hard
势保持稳
on
定。
rural migrant workers and
那么对
college
疫情
graduates
对
in
生产的影
particular,
响呢，应该说呢，
on how
今年以来
employment
呢
affects
特别是3月份，
economic
由于部分地区的
development and
疫情
livelihood.
的发展呢，那么对于这个一些接触型的
Due to
行业
COVID,
特别接触型的服务业呢，
contact
信息
businesses
影响较大。
were
那
weighed
么疫情条
on.
件下呢，居民的这个批零助餐、交通客
In
运、
the context
文
of
化旅游等
COVID,
接触性聚集性的消费呢
tourism,
有所减少，
catering
相关
industry
行业的生产呢造成一定
are
的影
witnessing
响
a contraction in their
同时
business
呢，一些
operation.
疫情严重地区的企业
Companies
这
in
个
hard-hit
停产生产，
areas
交通
have
部门受到
halted
了影
or
响，
cut back
那
in
么
their
有利于工业的
production.
生产。
Difficulty in
尽管呢存
transportation
在这
also
些问题
affected
和压
their
力，
production.
但是我们要看到呢，
Despite these
经济继续
pressure,
恢复呢还是有比较好的
economic
条件。
recovery is still solidly
一是呢，
founded.
经济发展有韧性，
First,
我国经
strong
济长期向好的
resilience.
基本面没有改
The
变，
fundamentals of
经济持续恢复的态势也
our
没有改变。
economy remains unchanged.
我国产业体系齐全，
We have a
基
fully
础设
fledged
施不断
industrial
改善，
system
超大规模
and
市场优势明
bettering
显，创
infrastructural
新驱动发
development.
展成效不断显
Innovation-driven
现，
development
推动经济持
is
续健康
brought to
发展，
bear
具有较好
to
的基础。
advance the sound growth of the
二是
economy.
科学防疫有条件
Second,，
疫情发生以
sound
来，我国
response
科学防控、
to the
精准防
pandemic.
控，形成了一套
We
有
have
效
taken
的、符
targeted
合
and
实际的防控措施，
science-based measures
维护
to
了经济社会
respond
大
to
局的
COVID
稳定。
cases.
今年以来，新冠疫情传播特点发生新的变化，
We are seeing
但只要
new
坚持科学
features
防疫，
in the transmission
我
of the
们能够
virus.
逐步
As
阻
long
断
as
疫
we
情传播，
stick
降
to
低对经济社会发展
our
的不利影响。
current measures, we will
三
be
是
able
政策支持
to
有
mitigate
力
the
度。
impact of
今
COVID
年以
on the
来，各地区
economy.
各部门坚持稳字
Third,
当头、稳中求进，
We are
积极
prioritizing
推出有利于经
stability
济稳定的
and
政策。
make progress on that
今年呢，
basis.
财
We
政
have
方面
taken a
呢
variety of
继续
policies
这个加大减税
in
降
that
费，
regard.
全年
We
呢
are
减税
cutting
降费呢
tax
将
and
达到
fee
2.5万亿，
to the tune of 2.5 trillion RMB yuan this
加
year.
大金融支持实体
We
经
are
济的力
also
度。面
stepping
对
up
复杂的
financial
局面呢，
support
宏观政
for
策实施力度呢将进一步加大。
businesses.
近期呢，人民银行也实施了
TVBS
全面的降准，
have cut
推进
RRR
降低企业的融资成本，
to lower financing costs for companies,
促进
which
经
will
济
be
平稳
beneficial and helpful for companies
下阶
and
段
in
推动
turn
经济持续
be
恢复，
conducive
要
to
坚持统筹
economic
疫情防
growth.
控和经济社会发
Going
展，
forward, we
做好
will strike a
常态化
balance
疫情
between
防控，
economic growth
加快
and
推进以出
pandemic
台政策
response.
早日落地见效，
We will
持续扩大内需，
deliver on the
持续
policies
促取纾
made
困，保障基本民生。谢谢。
and ensure that people's basic living needs are met. Thank you.
这边第3排吧，第3排这位女记者。
谢谢主持人。香港紫金杂志记者
Thank you.
提问：今年以来，全球大宗商品价格继续保
Since
持
this
坚挺。
year,
请问统计局对于
commodity
今年
prices
大宗
across
商
the
品价
world
格的趋势有何影响？有何评价？谢谢。
relatively high. What
谢谢
is
提问。
your assessment on how the commodity prices
今
will
年以来，
affect
国际形势呢发生了
the
很
growth?
多的变化。那么，
This
国际
year,
的
the
大
world
宗商品价格
situation
呢
has been very
是再
fluid,
创连续的
and
再创新
commodity
高。
prices have
那么，根据
registered
世界
new
银行的
highs.
数据来
Based
看呢，
on
3月份呢，
World
国
Bank
际能源价格指
statistics,
数
in
呢
March,
环比上涨了
international energy
24.1%。
prices came up
那么非能源价格指数环比
24.1%.
上涨了8.1%，
Non-energy commodities
总指数呢
rose by
创了近年
18.1%.
来的新高。
So these indexes were
那么
both
从
new
下阶段来
highs
看呢，国际
for
大宗
this
商品
year.
价格呢，可能这个高位波动的可能性较大。 它。
These
那么从
prices
供
are
给看呢，
expected to be
俄罗
volatile
斯
at
呢
a
是
high
全球
level.
重要的能源、
Globally,
粮食、
Russia is
出口大
important
国。
source of energy,
乌克兰
food,
的玉米、小麦出口呢占全
and
球的份
Ukraine
额
is
较
a
高。
major source of
那么俄乌地缘政治冲突导致相关产品产量下降，
the conflict has
这个
reduced
出口
the
管制的增
supply
加，
and
将冲击全球大宗商品市场的
exacerbated
供应。
export control,
那么
which
从
will
需求看，
impact the global
全球
commodity
经济持
market.
续恢复将支撑大宗商品需
The
求
global
的
recovery
增加。
will
那
show
么在
an
供给短
increase
缺的
in
恐慌
demand.
情绪下呢，一些大宗商品进
Under
口
the
国呢
panic,
囤货的需求增加，
some
加剧
countries
了供
will
需的失
increase
衡。
their hoarding of
同时呢，由于
relevant
地缘政治冲
commodities.
突
At the same
带来
time,
的部分国家间的
geopolitical
制裁和
conflicts
反制裁，
can lead to
影
sanctions
响
and
全球供应链
counter-sanctions,
效率。那么
which
大宗商品
will
运输
impact the
和
efficiency
交易
of
的成
global
本
supply
上
chain,
升，加大了
increase
价格上
the
涨的压
cost
力。
of logistics,
因此，在
and
国际
put a
大宗
heavier
商品市场
pressure
供求
on
关系
price
偏激
hike.
不确定性这个增大的背景下呢，
Amid such
价格高
growing
位波动的可能性
uncertainties,
比较大。
volatility at a high price level
好，请继续提问。
is highly likely. Thank you.
啊，后面吧，彭博，第5排。对，对。
My question is about industrial output. Crude steel output in the first quarter fell 10.5%. Cement fell 12.1%, and yet FAI, fixed asset investment, rose 9.3%. How do you explain the difference or the massive divergence between the collapse in industrial output for these products that are used for investment, but the continued rise in investment? Thank you.
请翻译一下。
我们看到第一季度的工业品，比如钢铁、水泥等都有大幅的下降，但是工业投资却有上升。请问如何解释这一些数据之间的矛盾之处？谢谢。
好，谢谢您的提问。应该说呢，这个大家呢对数据的关心呢，
for your question.
今年以来呢也是比较关注比较多。
This year,
那么总的
we
来看
have
呢，应该
heard
说呢，中国经
some
济呢，
concerns about the
随着近些年的
statistics
发展呢，这个
let me
过去
say
的高速增长
that
向
the
高
Chinese
速发展
economy
在转
is
变。
transitioning from
那么经济
high
增长
speed
的
growth
驱
to
动
high
力
quality
也有
development,
这个新的变化。
and there are
那
new
么我们看
changes
到呢，
in
在工业
economic
生产当中
performance.
呢，
In terms of
高技术
industrial
制造业
output,
和专业制造业
high-tech
呢
manufacturing and
是快速
equipment
增长。
manufacturing has been growing
那
very
么对于
fast,
工业的支撑呢，这个作用在
and
增
their
强。
support for
那么
industry has been very
在工
strong.
业投资当中，我们也看到
In terms of
在制造业
industrial
投资当中
investment,
呢
we can see
这
that the
个高技术
manufacturing,
制造业、
high-tech
装备制造业
manufacturing and
的
equipment
增长都是
manufacturing
保持了较快的增长。
has been
那么这样
growing
呢
at a high level.
我们说呢，这个过去以这个
In the past,
工业化、城镇化这个
industrialization and urbanization has been
驱动
driving
跟过去相比呢
growth
发
in
生了很大的
China,
变化。
but this has
那么我们
changed
看到呢
significantly in recent
这个
years.
您刚才讲到的这个
You just mentioned
钢铁、水泥、
steel, cement
这个是放缓，但是呢，这个
has slowed in their
工业
growth,
生产
but
的增长。那么
industrial
这主
output
要是由于
continued
我们说
to
在这个经济发展的驱动力上跟过去相比呢，
The reason
有
is
变化。
that the
那么
driving
现在呢
forces for the
更多呢
Chinese economy has changed a
向
lot,
中高端的迈进。
and we are moving
那么
toward the medium and higher
相
end
关
of
的这
the
种
value chain.
这个投资的在投资
And
当
our
中呢，我们
investment
看到今年
in
的
industry, for example,
这个
in this year,
投资三大领域当中的这个
you can see that in the three
制造
major
业
areas,
增长是较快的。那
manufacturing
么相
grew
对的，它对
quite
于
fast.
我们说传统的一些产品，比如说像钢铁，
And in terms of traditional products like steel and cement,
有很大的变化。那么这也是呢，
are not the same
对于
as
经济现象
what we saw
客观
before.
的看待。认真
So
地
we need to
分析
take
才能得出
look at
准
the
确的结论
economic performance objectively, and that's how we can lead to a correct conclusion. Thank you.
好，先这边吧，第3排那位男记者。对，
谢谢主持人。澎湃新闻记者提问： 近期，上海等省市的社会经济生活受到疫情冲击。
Work and life in
国家
Shanghai
统
and
计
some
局如何
other
看待
cities and provinces
此
have
轮
been
疫情的
affected
影
by
响？
COVID-19.
是否
How
会
do
影
you
响
look
今年
at
经济增速的目
the
标的实
impact of
现？
this wave of COVID-19 and how is it going to impact the growth this year?
今年以来呢，国际形势呢
Since the beginning of this year, there are uncertainties across the
地
world.
缘政治冲突加剧
COVID continues to spread globally. Geopolitical conflicts intensified. There are rising uncertainties and instabilities. Domestic flare-up of COVID cases, coupled with some factors that are different from what we'd expected, have added to economic a downward pressure on the economy. Regardless, under the strong leadership of the CPC Central Committee, different localities and departments are prioritizing stability and pursue progress on that basis and coordinate pandemic response and economic development. Economic indicators are kept within a reasonable range. Despite the pressure, there are still favorable conditions for us to maintain steady growth throughout the year. First, consumption recovery is expected to be sustained. COVID indeed weighed on consumption, but the recovery in consumption will not change, and it will continue to play a pivotal role. In the first quarter, growth in consumption contributed to 69.4% to economic development, still the biggest contributor. As COVID impact is gradually kept at bay, employment-first policy is brought to bear, they will also increase the willingness and ability of residential consumption. Efforts to advance consumption of EV and smart home appliances, integration of online and offline consumption, development of new business models and growth models, consumption upgrade in rural areas will also increase or sustain the growth in consumption. Second, investment is expected to be enhanced. In the first quarter, manufacturing increased by 15.6% in terms of investment. Investment in infrastructure increased by 8.5%. As we are upgrading traditional industries and cultivating new industries, we will be able to boost investment in the industrial sector. On the decisions of the country and the 14th Five-Year Plan, we are properly front-loading relevant investment in infrastructure, which will also be conducive. Third, industrial upgrade. We are adopting innovation-driven strategy to shore up our technological development. We are adopting extra tax deduction for R&D expenses, which is producing benefit. In the first quarter, high-tech manufacturing increased by 14.2%, equipment manufacturing by 8.1%. Industries are becoming more tech-intensive. Fourth, green transitioning is also playing an important role. As we are advancing green development, there is a growing demand for energy-efficient products, and as we are transforming the traditional sector to less carbon-intensive, we will be able to boost development of relevant industries. In the first quarter, EV and solar-powered batteries production capacity increased by 140.8% and 24.3% respectively. 5G, information, and AI are also developing rapidly, cultivating new growth points. In the first quarter, smart consumption manufacturing increased by over 10% year-on-year. Fifth, reform and opening up. Despite complex international circumstances, the global recovery is still sustained, which means that there is growing demand for Chinese export products. We are taking measures to stabilize foreign trade, and as we are advancing Belt and Road cooperation, there are more business forums, which means it is conducive to the growth in trade. In the first quarter, our trade grew by 10.7%, which show the resilience of our trade. Sixth, macroeconomic policies. We are acting on the decisions of the Central Economic Work Conference and the Government Work Report. We are making progress while maintaining stability, rolling out policies to stabilize economic growth and support the real economy. We are ensuring supply to stabilize price. We are front-loading arrangements in terms of macroeconomic policies. We are actively supporting market entities to ensure food and energy security, to safeguard industrial and supply chains. With these policies, we will be able to maintain steady economic recovery. Overall, we still have large market opportunities, and tremendous benefits coming out from reform and opening up. Throughout the year, economic recovery is expected to be sustained. That said, we need to place high importance on the problems we are facing right now and act on the decisions by the CPC Central Committee and the State Council, strike a balance between economic development and pandemic response, and step up macroeconomic policies to stabilize growth. Thank you.
好，先第一排吧，这位女记者。
谢谢主持人。封面新闻记者提问：今年以来，房地产销售下降，
Since this year there is
房地产投资
a
仍能保持一
drop
定增
in
长。
real estate
对此您
sales,
如何看待？
but there is
下阶段
growing
房地产市场
investment
如何？
in this sector. What is your assessment, and how do you see it will develop in the future?
市场呢，大家也是比较关注。
Thank you.
那么
The real
对于
estate
房地产
market
的
has
一些
been
指
followed
标的
very
变化呢，
closely,
大家
and
讨论也比较多。
some indicators
那么
this year
从历
in
史
terms
上
of
来
real
看
estate
呢，
has been
房
discussed
地产的
widely.
投资和商品房销售的增长
Historically,
关系呢，总体上
The
是
two
保持了
indicators you
横向的变
mentioned
化。
has been
但是房地
proceeding
产
in
投
the
资的
same
增长呢，
direction,
它的变化呢，明
but
显要小
the
于商品
growth
房的销售。
in real
那
estate
主要原因
market
呢，是由于房地产
is
项目呢，
significantly smaller
一旦开
than
工建设，
the sales
房地
of
产企业
commercial
一般会
buildings.
持续的推进
Normally,
项目建
when
设，
a project
从而保
is
证项目销售的回
started,
款。
they will continue to
相应
invest
房地
to
产
ensure
投资
the
相对于
return
销售
of
呢，具有一
investment.
定的稳定性。
And there is a steady
因此，即
stream
便在
of
市场销
input.
售低迷甚至出现下降的情况下，
Even in
这个房地产投
sluggish
资呢，仍然
market,
有可能保持一定的增长。
the investment
那么，比如
could
在
maintain
2012年、
a certain
2014年、
extent of
2015
growth.
年呢，
In
都曾经出
2012,
现过这种情况。
2014, and 2015, we have seen
那么今年
similar
一季度呢，
situations.
房地产开发投资同比增
In
长
first quarter this
1.7%，
year,
而商品房销
real
售
estate
面积
development
呢
investment
下
grew
降
by
了
0.7%, while
商品房销售额
the
呢
number
下
of floor
降了
space of commercial
7%。
buildings sold
那么在
dropped
销
by
售下降的情况下呢，
13.8%, and total
房地产
sales
投资保持
revenue
一定
dropped
增
by
长呢，主要呢是由于以
22.7%.
下几个方面的因素。
So this
一个呢是保
going
交
in
付
the
等相
opposite
关政策
direction,
的
it
作
can be
用。
explained by
那
a
么去
few
年底以
reasons.
来呢，
First
各地
is the
区坚持
effect
保
of the
交付、
policies
保民生、
including
保稳
ensuring
定，
delivery.
积极推动
Delivery.
前期
Since last year,
停建缓
the
建的
end of
房地产
last
项
year,
目复工复产。
all the
推进
regions
在
have
建项目
continued
的
to
建
ensure
设。
delivery,
那
ensure
么一季
people's
度呢，
livelihood, and
施
ensure
工期在1年
stability.
以上的房地产项目投
For
资呢，
those that have been invested
投
for
资
more
的
than
增长速
1
度
year,
呢超过了10%。
the
那么随着
growth
房
of
地产
investment
建筑
exceeded
房地产项目
10%.
施工建设的推进呢，
As the
一季
project
度
continued to be
房地产开
implemented,
发投资当中呢，建筑安装工程投资呢，
the
同比
installment
增长了0.9%。
investment
那么拉动
increased
房地产
by
投资增长呢，
0.9%,
超过0.5个百分点。
which has driven
二
the
是土地
growth
购置
of
费制
real
度的
estate
影响。
investment by more than
房地产开发
0.5
投资中
percentage
呢，
points.
前期发生的
Secondly,
土地购置费
the
是
purchase
随着
of
房地产
land
施工
has
建设
been
呢逐步
included
提升，
in the calculation.
相应的也支撑了房地产投资的增
The
长。一季度
spending
土
on
地购
land
置费
acquisition has been
同比增长了
supported
0.6%，
the numbers in
拉动
investment
房
in
地
real
产开发投
estate.
资增长超过0.1
In
个百分点。
Q1, land
那么
acquisition
还要看到呢，尽管
grew
房地
by
产销售下降，
0.6%, which
但
also
是
has driven
房
the
地产销售
growth
总
of
额呢
real
仍然
estate
大于
development
房地产
investment
投
by
资总额。
more than 0.1
房地
percentage
产销
point.
售呢，仍
At the same time, we
然
must
能够
see
在一定程度上
that
支
despite the
撑
drop in sales,
投资。
the total
同时
revenue
呢，
of
房地产保
sales
持投资
is
保持增
still
长呢，还受到
bigger
价格因素的影
than
响。
the
今年以
volume
来
of
呢，建
investment,
筑材料、
and
工程安
sales
装
can
等
still
价格
support
涨
to
幅
some
较高，
extent
也一定程度
investment.
呢推高了房地产投资的名义增
At the
速。
same time, the rise in prices of
关于
materials
下
and
阶段房地产这个
installment has also
这个走势的情况来看呢，
beefed up the
尽
nominal
管
growth
当前的
of
房地
real
产
estate
投资
investment.
这个房地产的销售呢在下降，
Despite
但
the
是也要
fall
看到
in the real
随着多
estate
地呢
sales at the moment,
多地呢适度放开限购限售，
as
降低公积金使用
different
门槛，
regions
加快
continue
购房审批
to
等。
adopt
那么
policies
部
such
分住
as
房、部分城
easing
市
the
的住房需
restriction
求
of
呢有所释放，
purchases, lowering
那
the
么销售面
threshold
积呢
of
降幅呢有所释放。
public housing
下阶段
providence,
呢，各地坚持
and
房住不炒，
acceleration of
持续稳
approval
地
of
价、稳
loans.
房价、稳预期，
The needs will be
完善房地
met,
产市场长效
and
机制，
the
积极
sold
满
floor
足合理
space
住房需求，
will
全
narrow
国
in
商品
its
房
decline.
销售下行的态势呢可能得
We
到
will
缓解。
continue to
随着
make
长租
sure
房
that
市
the
场不断
houses
完
are
善，
for
保
to be
障房
living
建设
in,
加
not
快
to be
推进，
speculated with,
房地产市
and
场呢有
continue
望逐步趋
to
稳。
improve
谢谢。
the real estate market
好，请继续
and
提问。
stabilize this property market.
先这边吧，第二排这位记者。
谢谢发言人。向经济导报记者提问： 我们注意到，近日中共中央国务院关于加快建设全国统一大市场的意见发布。
The State Council has released a policy paper on building a unified domestic market. How can we understand this policy, and what are the measures to do that?
Thank you. There is an opinion on building a unified market, proposing to establish unified standards for a domestic market and break relevant bottlenecks and increase the flow of production factors across the country. It will be conducive to the building of a unified market. We have a big market, but we are now moving toward a stronger market. It will be beneficial for us to build a high-quality socialist economy and the high-quality development that we are advocating for. First, it is a foundation and important requirement for us to foster a new development paradigm. For the sound and healthy growth of the economy, we must adhere to the new development philosophy and foster a new development paradigm with domestic circulation as the mainstay and international and domestic circulation reinforcing each other. We need to establish a normative domestic market which will be beneficial for the flow of production factors. Second, it is beneficial for us to have a transparent, fair market environment. We are making efforts to set up a good market environment for business entities to boost employment and advance development. As the development of unified market advances, there will be a more fair and transparent market environment, which will create more high-quality job opportunities and inject strong impetus for the growth of the domestic economy. Third, it will be conducive to innovation development. We have 1.4 billion people and a super big market. This unified market and adhering to the decisive role of the market will be good for proper allocation of resources and division of labor. It will encourage companies to advance innovation and improve efficiency, quality, and growth drivers. It will be also a strong underpinning for domestic development. Fourth, it will be good for us to lower transaction costs. Going forward, we need to implement the opinions to establish a unified market, align different standards, build a unified market, and ensure that there is fairness and compliance oversight. All these will be beneficial for the sustained growth of the domestic economy. Thank you.
谢谢我是路透社的。我就问一下，
From
咱们现在
Reuters.
经济面临这个下行压力比较大。
There is downward pressure on the economy
对这个疫情的管控。
More cities are
价格又往上走
having restrictive measures due to COVID.
另外就是能
Will they increase risks
这个
for stagflation?
这个进出口的对经济增长的贡献。
How?
谢谢。
And I would like to know more about the role of trade for economic development. I will take your second question first. On the role of trade. Trade increase contributed to 3.3% to domestic growth. Sorry, that was consumption. And trade in goods contributed to 0.2 percentage points
关心的问题。
To the domestic
还有您
growth
关心的就是增长和这个价格问题呢。关于
and
增长
on
呢，
the role of
前面呢
investment,
这个已经做了介绍。
price.
看呢，经济增长呢保持稳定恢复呢。
We are seeing a steady recovery in economic growth, which will be
关于价
sustained
格的问题呢，
on prices.
这个做点回应。那么今年以来呢，确实呢，国际大宗商品价格呢持续上涨，对国内的这
Commodity
个
prices
影响
are
加
increasing,
大。但是总的看呢，
adding to
这个
the
市场
impact
供给呢，商
on
品
the
和服务
domestic
市场供给
economy.
是比较充足啊。
We
供给
have
必须
sufficient
保持价格稳
supply
定呢，
of
具有
goods
较好的基础。
and
那么
a
从
solid
价格
foundation for us
情况来
to
看呢，今年以来
maintain
呢，
stable
居民消费
price.
价格呢保持是温和水平。
CPI
一季度呢
witnessed a
，CPI 呢
mild
同比上涨了
growth.
1.1%，
CPI
比
growth
1到2月份呢
by
略有扩大。那么
1.1%,
核心 CPI 呢
relatively
上涨
bigger
1.2%，
than the
和这个1到2月份呢是持平
than
的。
last quarter.
那么从月度来看呢
On
，3
a,
月份
on a monthly
CPI 涨幅有所
basis,
扩大，
in March,
同比上
CPI
涨1.5%，
grew
涨
by
幅呢比上月扩大 0.6%。
1.5%,
其中核心 CPI 呢上涨 1.1%，
0.6
上
higher
月是持
than
平的
last
持
month.
平。
Core
我们看有以
CPI
下几个特点。
was
一是食
1.1%,
品价格
relatively
呢
the same
降幅
than
收窄。
last month.
3月份食品价格呢同
Food
比下降
prices in
1.5%，
March dropped by
降幅比上月收窄
1.5%.
2.4个百分点。其中猪肉价格下降 41.4%，
Price in
收
pork
窄 1.1个百分点。
dropped by
二是工业消费
1.4%.
品价格涨幅有所扩大。3月
Second,
份工业消费品价格
industrial
同比上涨
products
3.5%， 涨幅比上月扩大 0.4个百分点。
increased by
三是服务
3.5%.
价格涨幅略有回落。3月份服务价格同比上涨
Services
1.1%，
price
涨幅比上月
dropped by
回落 0.1个百分点。
1.1%,
那么3月份 CPI 涨幅
increased
扩
by
大呢，主要是由
1.1%,
于鲜菜和能源价格上涨。
0.1 percentage points
那
less.
么受疫情和天气因素
Due
影
to
响
COVID
，3月
and
份鲜菜价
weather,
格呢，由上
vegetable
月的
prices
同比下降 0.1%， 转为上涨 17.2%。
increased by
同时呢，3月份国内能源价格呢同比上涨
1.2%,
13.4%， 涨幅比上月扩大1个百分点。那么二者合计影响 CPI 上涨呢是
In
1.32个百分点，
the two
占
have
CPI
contributed
总涨幅
to
的90%。
1.42 percentage points,
那么从走势看呢，尽管存在国际
accounting
经济因
for
素
around
以及部分
90%.
鲜活食品短期供给的压力，
Fresh
但是
food
总的看呢 ，CPI 保持温和上
is
涨，
facing
条件还是比较多。
supply pressure,
那么从
but there are
需求
still
看呢，
considerable
投资需求呢仍
favorable
在恢复之中，
favorable
对价格的
conditions
拉动作用
for
有
the
限。
prices.
从供给看呢，
From the
粮食
supply
生产
side,
连续丰收，库存
food
充裕，
is
生
harvested,
猪产能呢
there
总
is
体恢复，
sufficient
猪肉供给呢
reserves,
总体充足，价格呢还在下降。
pork
那么
supply
我国
is
商品和服务
sufficient,
市场呢
and
供应能力
the
呢
price is
比较
steady.
充足的。3月份呢，
In
服务
March,
这个价格呢同比上涨 1.1%，
services
涨幅呢比
price
上月
increased
回
by
落 0.1%。
1.1%,
同时
down
呢，要看
for
到市场保供
0.1
稳价的
percentage
措施
points
呢
compared
还
with
会持
last
续显效，
month.
也有利于价格稳定。那么总的看呢，价格保持
Overall,
总体稳定、温和上涨的
steady
这种态势呢
price
还是有基础
and
有
mild
条件的。
growth
谢谢。
is well founded.
继续
Thank
提
you.
问。我们时间关系，最后一题吧，第一排。
The last question.
谢谢主持人，谢谢发言人。新京报记者提问。
Thank you.
近年以来，受到国际局势的影
Over the
响，
years,
全
due
球的
to
能源和粮食供应都出现
international
了瓶颈的局
circumstances,
面。那么当前
there
国
is
内
tightening,
的能源生
there is
产、
pressure
能源
on
生
the
产的
supply
状况如
of
何？下一阶段能否满足市场的需要？
supply.
谢谢您的提
Can
问。
the supply meet
确实呢
domestic demand?
今
Thank
年
you.
呢，国际形势呢发生比较大的变化。
Indeed, there's a big change in international situation this year, which has an impact on agricultural supply and
总的看呢，
production.
从国内来看呢，我们说呢，
But if you look at the domestic market, agricultural output and supply has been
首先呢来
stable.
看，
First of
农业
all,
呢，这个近年来呢，国家是高度重视农业的发展，那么出台一系
government
列措施，鼓励和
attaches
支
great
持农业
importance to
发展，
agriculture and
加强
has
耕地保护，
adopted a lot
推
of
进高标
policies
准农田的
to
建设，
support the
发挥
development
农
of
业科技作
agriculture,
用，
to
促进粮食
give
生
better
产、
play
农业
to
丰收，
science
取
and
得了积
technology
极
and
成效。
cultural development
那
and
么
has
我们国
produced
家的
good
粮食生
results.
产呢，已经连续
China's
7
grain
年稳定
output
在
for
1.3
7
万亿斤
years
以上。
has
那么生猪生
maintained
产呢，也
above
恢复到了正常年份的水平。
1.3
从
trillion
今年的情况来
in
看呢，农业生产形势呢也保持总体稳定。
and our
一季度呢，第一
output
产业增加
in
值
first
同
quarter
比增
has
长了
been stable as
6%，
well.
保持一个较快的增长。
Output
那么从
grew
种
by
植业来看呢，
6%.
一季度农业总产值
In
呢
terms of
增长了
crop
4.8%。
plantation, The value added grew by
受去年秋季严重
4.8%,
汛情的影响呢，
affected
部分
by
地区呢冬小麦
the
的播
flood
期
in
明显拉
autumn.
长，冬小麦播种面积稳中略
The
降，苗
plantation
情
of
偏弱。
wheat in winter
但是今
had
年
been
春季以来呢，
postponed,
冬小
and
麦主产区的气候呢总体适宜，
this
各地
year
呢也是加大力度呢抓好田间管理，
weather conditions
苗
for
情呢是逐
winter
步转好。
wheat has been
同时呢，西北
very
地区
good
呢也
and
是积极扩
favorable.
大春小麦的种植
And
面积。那么小麦总播种面积呢，基本持平
Northwestern region,
那
the
么从畜牧业
plantation
看呢，
and
生产
demand
呢
has basically matched each other.
稳定。一季度呢，畜牧业
That's
总
why
产
there
值
is
呢同比
steady
增
and
长了
sufficient
8%。
supply.
牛羊禽肉产量呢比上年同期增长了
Meat and
8.8%。
poultry grew by
那么从下阶段情况来看呢，粮食
8.8% in the
呢
first
生
quarter,
产
and
稳
in the
定呢
next
还是有
step,
保障的。
I think
一呢，
food
一是
supply
呢，各
will be
地呢是
stable.
层层压实生产责任，全面
Because
落实党政，
firstly, different levels
落
of
实粮食安
government
全党政同
has been
责，
working
主产区、
rigorously to
主销
implement
区和
decisions
粮
of the State
产销
Council to
平衡区
ensure
呢都要
food
表
security,
面积保产量，
and they
加
will
强耕地
ensure
用途管理，确保
the
粮食生产。
the area of
二是
arable
粮食生
land
产的支持力
and
度在加
plantation
大。
areas.
那么稻谷小麦最低
And
收购价呢
secondly,
有所提高，
The
继
price
续稳定
for the
玉米、
purchase
大豆
of
生
rice
产者
and
补贴
wheat
和稻
has
谷补
been
贴，
going
那么
up,
下达了
which will
200亿
ensure
元的农
good
资补
supply
贴，调动农民种粮的积极性。
and will mobilize
三是种
the
植收益
farmers
效益改
to
善。
increase
2021年以
production.
来呢，粮食价格呢稳中
Thirdly,
有升，农
The
民种
grain
粮的收入呢
prices
增
have seen
加，
a
种
steady
植意愿
growth,
增强。
and that's why people
当
are
然也
more
要看
willing
到呢，
to plant
这
the crops.
个种粮成本呢也有所上升，气象
But at the
灾害、
same
地
time,
震害呢还存在不确定性
costs，has been
仍然要
climbing
切
as
实抓
well,
好粮食
and
生产。
we still
确
need
保
to
粮食安
work
全。
to tackle the challenge
关于
of
能源方面来
insects
看呢，今年呢，
and
能
weather
源生产呢也
conditions.
是保持总体稳定。一季度
In the first
煤
quarter,
油、气电等主要能源产品产量呢持续增
major
长，
industrial
国能源
products
供
such
应呢
as
总体稳
electricity
定。
and thermal
一是
power
原煤生产呢保
has
持较快
been
增长，
growing.
煤炭生产企业呢
Coal
深入
production
落实煤炭增
coal
产保供任
producers
务，加
has
快
been
释放煤炭
implementing
优
the
质
policy
产
to
能，
ensure stable
有
supply,
效增加煤炭供
increase the
给。
quality of
一
coal.
季度规模以上工业原煤产量呢
Large
达到了
scale
10.8
coal
亿吨，
producers
同比增长了10.3%。
has produced
二是油气生产稳定增长，
108 million
油气增
tons,
储
which
上
is
产
an
的力
increase
度
of
加大。
10.3%.
一季度规模以上工业原油产量呢同比增长了4.4%，
Large scale
那么
crude
天
oil
气产量呢同
producers
比增长了6.6%。
produced
那
4.4%
么
more
电力生产呢持
year
续
on
增
year,
长，一季度规模以上工业发
Electricity
电量
supply
同比增长了3.1%，
grew by
其中清洁能源
3.1%,
发电同比增长了
and clean
8.3%，
energy
那么
grew
拉
by
动规模以上工业
8.3%,
发电量呢增长了2.1个百分点。
drove
那么尽管受到地缘
2.1%
政治冲突
growth
等因素的影响
in，all
近期国际
electricity
能源商
supply.
品价格上涨较快，国际能源市场不稳定性在
The
增加。
in the international
我国
market,
能源
energy
安全保
prices
障
has
面临一定
been
压力，
volatile,
但我们有条件、有能
and
力、
we
有
are facing
办
some
法
pressure
确
in
保我国
energy
能源
supply,
安
but we
全
have the
可靠稳定
capability
供应。
to ensure
下阶段呢
stable
还是按照
and
中央的
reliable
部署，
supply of energy.
进一步
In the
落实
future,
出
we
台
will
的能源保
continue
供
to
稳价措施，
implement
积极
the
增加煤、
policies to ensure
油、
stable
气电等
prices
主
and
要能
supply
源
of
产品供
energy,
给，
and continue
积极应
to
对国际
ensure
能源价格上涨所带来的
sound
风险，
supply of
坚决
traditional
守好
energy
民生
like coal,
民
oil,
生用能底
and
线，
gas,
确保能源安全稳定供应和
to
经济社会平稳健康发展。
ensure the steady development of
好，谢谢
agriculture
梁
and
部
the
长，谢
economy
谢各位
as
记
a
者朋
whole.
嗯
友们的
Thank
参
you.
与。今天的国务院新闻办新闻发布会就到
That's
这里，
the end
大家
of
再见。
the press conference today. Thank you for coming.